Hello, you're very welcome to the virtual Art and Craft Christmas Fair with Search Press. My name is Grahame Booth and I'm going to be doing a little demo for you today. It's going to be a snow scene, and the reason I've chosen the snow scene is that my new book, which is Watercolour Snow Scenes, is just out. It's just been released, and it's part of the Take Three Colours series, which means I'll only be using three colours and three brushes to paint the painting. Now, the one I'm doing today isn't in the book, so the book, all new stuff in the book, but I'm going to do one today just to give you an idea of what it's like just to paint with three colours and three brushes. The setup really is fairly standard. The three colours I'll be using, and you can shout very loudly at the television if I dip into something wrong. We've got cobalt blue, Windsor red, and quinacridone gold. Those three colours, only those three colours. And the three brushes I'm using a flat 1-inch goat hair brush. I'll be using a size 14 round brush, and I'll be using a little sword liner. Sword liners have got lovely pointy points. Lovely points on them anyway. And just these three brushes and those three paints. So we'll get started. Now, the thing about snow is that there has to be an element of warmth in it. You might think, well, snow's cold, so that would be blues and colours like that. And yes, to a certain extent that's true, but you also need warmth. So I'm going to get a nice warm tone. Something like this. Plenty of water, plenty of paint, and going to just get this on over the paper. So I'm going to cover all of the paper, but I'll vary that color as I go down. So I'll get a little bit of my cobalt and a touch of the red. In fact, a little bit of that should do it. There we go. That will just give me a little bit of variety. Carry on down. Now you might think, but what about the snow? Because we're getting near to the snow. The snow has to be white, so you have to leave the paper white. Well, no, you don't. The snow just has to be light. It doesn't have to be white. So I'm just going to continue on down and drop in little bits of warmth here and there, just randomly. And that will do for the first wash. Dry up drips. If there are any drips, it's very important that you dry those up because they will tend to run back and cause cauliflowers, things like that. And then we'll let that dry. Now, because this is a recording, you'll not have to watch me as I wield my hairdryer, but join me again in a few seconds. Now, it's a good rule of thumb to begin at the back of the subject, so as far away as possible, and then work up to the foreground. So we've got a field here, snow-covered field here, and we've got some trees, shrubs behind that. So I'm just going to use mostly the cobalt for this, and just going to drop that in. I'm not really going to worry about that tree. I'm just going to go right over the tree because the tree is generally going to be darker. And I'm going to soften the top. Now, for softening I am going to use a separate brush. And the reason I'm using this is it here, it's an old sable brush. The reason I'm using a separate brush to do the softening is that it can wear a brush out, and you don't really want to be wearing your good brushes out. You want to save the points on those, but I just want to soften that. It's in the distance. I want to keep it very simple, very soft. Now a little bit more of the cobalt, and we'll get a little bit of cobalt on that distant field, just to sort of hint at a few little shadows in the snow, really. And again, I'm going to soften that because it's still in the distance. I'm going to save the harder edges for as we get closer, as we get more forward, more into the foreground. There we go. That's got that. Okay. Now, then we have a background trees, we have a middle ground snow-covered field, and then we have the foreground, which is a great big tree and shrubs and things like that. So I want to separate the foreground from the middle ground, and again I'm going to use cobalt. I've switched my brush now to the round. The big flat brush at the moment has done its job. So I'm painting around the edge of the foreground snow. But I want variety into this, so I'm going to use some of that original sky colour and just drop a little bit of it in. But again, soften, keep things slightly soft. Up here at the edge, soften. Dry up the drips. Well, now that has given me a little bit of separation. Now the middle ground field and the foreground area are pretty much exactly the same, so I will probably change that slightly, but I'll need to dry this first. So once again, I'll be back in a moment or two when this is dried. Okay, so we're back again, and this area has now dried, so I can now think about the trees that are slightly, I've got a great big tree at the left here, and I've got a smaller tree just to the right, and I'm going to put a couple of these slightly more distant trees in, and again this will be mostly cobalt, possibly with a little bit of the red in there, because that gives quite a nice greyish colour. Just using the tip of the brush. Now there's only so far I can go with this brush, so I'm going to change to my little sword liner brush, because it will allow me to do lots of nice thin branches. Just let the sword liner just sort of, a little jerky movement is the best thing. You don't want curves. There are very few trees that have curved branches. They're nearly all, the branches split and divide, so you don't want them to be too rounded. So little jerky movements will give you a much better feel for the thing. Okay, that's not too bad. And maybe we'll put another one here in the background again. And say the sword liner is a super brush for this, because it has such a fine point. Now all my brushes that I'm using today all come from Rosemary & Co, and Rosemary & Co produces great brushes, lovely brushes, at a good fair price too. Now be careful, it's very easy to overdo all these little twigs because it's quite fun to do. So I don't want to overdo that, but I have been careful to allow the two sort of semi-distant trees to mingle together. So some of the little branches and twigs, you wouldn't necessarily be absolutely sure whether they're from the left tree or the right tree. Again, over here a bit, just a couple more. I did say it was good fun. And then I want some bigger, darker shrubs here, a sort of hedge really. So again, I'm going to use all three colours here, because if I use the blue, then mix the red, that will give me a grey. But if I then add some of the yellow, then I start to get some nice greenish colours, and a bit more red would make that more brownish colours. Using the side of the brush, notice the way I'm holding the brush between my thumb and forefinger, and then just with a motion like this, that gives me some suggestion of closer shrubs. Again, with the sword liner, I can get a few little bits coming out of that. And while that is wet, I can vary that. So for example, if I add a little bit more red into that, I can drop that in, and it just gives me the variety that is so necessary in a painting. Variety really is vital. So little bits of that just dotted around so that we get a variety. Maybe just now if it looks like that, that's perhaps a little bit, it's not drifting far enough for me. So what I'm going to do is just take my softening brush, make sure it's almost dry, and I can use that just to tease some of that colour over a little bit. So the colour hasn't really drifted as much as I would like. I'm using this almost dry brush. Just, you can see how dry it is with the little marks that I'm making here, and that will create the variety that I'm looking for there. Now if we go back over to this side again with these three colors, it's amazing just how many different hues you can get from these three colors. It's quite extraordinary. Okay, so here again, side of the brush. Now I'd quite like a little bit of autumn colour in here. You'll always get a little bit of autumn colour left. And the big advantage is that it gives that little bit of warmth. Now there's a couple of ways of applying it. I can just put a few little dots, or I can use splatter. A little bit of splatter will give quite a random feel to things. And it's much quicker than just doing lots and lots and lots of little dots. Now because this is relatively dark, I will paint around my tree. Always a good idea that if something disappears behind something else, it should reappear as well. If it doesn't reappear, it tends to, it looks a little bit strange, a little bit odd. And we'll have a couple of little tufts of grass coming out of the snow there. Okay, now there are other elements back there too. We've got a little fence. So let's get some, I'm just going to paint, you saw the mixture I made. It was just a little bit stronger mix of the, essentially the cobalt and the red. Now maybe one more. Now, okay, so that's given me some middle ground interest now, and you can see the nice variety of colour that really helps to, what we need to get to, in order for the snow to look light, we need to get some darks in, and when we get the darks in, that helps the snow look white and bright. Okay, we'll let that dry, and then we'll go back to it and start thinking about this, the great big foreground tree. Now just while I'm waiting for that to dry, I can tell you a little bit more about the fair. There'll be lots of demonstrations like this. There'll be lots of competitions for signed books. There's also a competition for hand cream, but make sure you put the hand cream on after you finish painting. Hand cream on watercolour paper is not a good idea. So there's all those things to look forward to with the fair, and lots of other demonstrations, as I say, like this one. Right, back to the picture. Now there are several ways of painting detailed or semi-detailed foreground trees, and I'll show you one way today to do this. The tree is best started at the top and then work down. Now that might seem counterintuitive, but the reason is if you start at the bottom and work up, as you paint up, your wet paint will run down to what you've just already painted and will completely flood that area and will probably cause drips. Whereas starting at the top and working down means you can control all of that. So let's see, again, we've got the mixture more or less of the cobalt and the red. Now I'm going to take this brush almost dry, and I can get a little bit of sort of, this is going to be ultimately twigs. Not too much, just a little bit here and there. And then back in with my sword liner. And then just paint that back. I've penciled in lightly where the tree is going to be, so I know where I need to paint to. I'll just paint the other side as well. That's okay for a start for that. Now to get the tree, I want to get a little bit of light on the tree. And I think I'd like some light on the left. That way I can get a shadow coming down and over the snow. So if I want to do that, there are a couple of ways of doing it, but this way works quite well. So if I run my brush down the shadow side, and then just, I can rinse that, or I'll just use the softening brush for this, and run the softening brush down the other side, what will happen is that the color will just gently drift across. Oops, tipped into ultramarine there, tut tut. I think I got away with it, nobody noticed. And then I can reinforce the dark side. Now this is still damp, so it means that we get some nice soft blends, which is what we want, because the tree, I don't want that. That's much too hard edged. So I'm just going to take my almost dry brush and just soften that a little bit. And we'll bring some of that color across with this dry brush. And that's giving me a reasonable suggestion of a trunk of a tree. Now, just to be, my right side there is a little bit ragged, so I'll just tidy that up a little bit. There we go. Again with the softening brush, just feather that out a little bit. There we go. We'll work on down with that then. And the wet line to the left. There we go, there it drifts across very nicely. And while that's doing its own thing, I can get a few extra little branches in. Remember, there'll be branches in the front of the tree as well as coming from the sides or the back. Remember that little jerky movement? It's always difficult to know just how many branches to put on a tree. But generally speaking, you don't want as many as would be there in reality, because if you put the number in that would be in a real tree, it would really be much too congested. And at the bottom of a tree, particularly one that isn't in a park or somewhere like that, you will always get little sort of shoots coming out of the bottom. Remember, from the front as well. Okay, little bit darker in places, I think. Some of my branches are not really much different to the trees behind, so I just want to make them slightly stronger. And I can do that just, hopefully if they're still wet, I can just drop a little bit of colour in. No, they're dry. Okay, not to worry. Okay, now with that, then we'll get some more of the sort of autumn leaf colour in. And you can, what I would suggest not doing is don't do this, because you get the same mark every time. Instead, if you're painting your leaves on, try to do it in different ways. So try to make each leaf a slightly different shape. So you can put them on by hand, or indeed you can use the splatter again. Now the splatter, as I say, gives the random spread of leaves, but it also it's quicker, and it gives you this nice looseness to the subject. So we're doing pretty well here. We've got down to this bottom third. So now in the bottom third, I want to try to get something to suggest the shape of our snow. So the snow is coming down the bank, across the path, and then up the bank on the other side. So we can use shadow to describe this. So let's get some shadow color. So again, the cobalt, I'll just use almost pure cobalt. There was perhaps a little bit of that color in my brush, but by and large it is pure cobalt. So this is the tree shadow. So it's coming down the hill, over, and then up the other side. Now I want to make this a little bit smoother, because that's the thing about snow. It is very, very smooth. And there will be other shadows. There'll be trees growing over to the left, so why would there not be shadows from those? As well as from this tree, we would have the side branches. And in this case, the shadows will sort of disappear and reappear as they go behind little heaps of the snow. As well as that, we would have the shadows from little tufts of grass. Now, I haven't done the tufts of grass, but as I have the shadow on my brush, I can do the shadows from the tufts of grass. It looks a bit strange when you've got these little blue shapes, but it will look okay. And it's a good idea to get a nice shadow coming down the bottom of the paper, because it gives a nice, it contains the light, so the light stays here. So just lean on the brush and then lift it slightly, and that will give you that nice thin and then thicker and then thinner again. Now for the little tufts of grass. Now remember, you can do the grass first and then the shadow. just happened that I had the colour on my brush. And indeed, we'll do a few extra ones. I think I can probably just use the bigger brush for this. So where did we do them? We did one there. We did one there. Admittedly, it's probably a little bit easier to do the grass first and then the shadow of the grass afterwards. A bit more logical. But this then helps to describe the slope, helps to describe the shape of the snowfield. Now a little bit of, I want to indicate the path a little bit more. So again, with that mixture of the cobalt and the red, so it's a little hint of a track. And notice I'm breaking it up, so I'm not making it one long continuous line. And the reason is, again, you would have little flurries of snow, little piles of snow that would hide the background. And apart from that, breaking, it's always good to break lines up anyway. If you keep your lines continuous, they tend to be far too eye-catching. Okay, so we've got the main elements really of the scene in. There's not really very much more to do, but there's a couple of little things I'd sort of like just to show you. I'm going to use the softening brush for this, and in this case I'm going to use it to lift out. Now remember, although this is a fourth brush and you might think I'm cheating, the reason I'm using this is that if you use one of your good brushes to lift out, you will tend to dull the point. You will very quickly wear the point away. So much better to use an old brush for lifting out. So a couple of little things. So for example, where the branches are crossing over, there for example, I can just lift out a little bit of light there, and that indicates which branch is in front of which branch. I don't think I've got to, well, there's one crossing over here. Let's have that. And these colours should all lift out quite well. In the background here, we could have little bits of light. So for example, our fence post, it could be a little bit lighter as it comes down. So we just lift it out a little bit from our background. Our little side shoots, we can lighten those where they're crossing the fence post behind. What you can also do is, if I get a little bit of kitchen roll, you can use the kitchen roll, you can use the brush to sort of scrub, and then you can use the kitchen roll to remove the lighter part that you've just lifted. So all these little extras, each one on their own is doing very, very little, but together they start to create a more interesting overall effect. So it would be very easy just to leave the painting as it is, but these extra little, we'll call them details, they help to create added interest. Now again, this is quite fun to do. Once you start doing it, you realise, hey, this is all right. This is good fun, and it's so easy to overdo things. So just be careful. And the other thing is, it helps to break up this area. So for example, here we have a little a little piece of grass coming up. So you can't see it in front of that dark background, but if I just lift it out, just with a gentle scrubbing action, then you can see it in front of the background dark mass. There we go. Back to the tree. If you want to get a little bit more definite bark on the tree, now it depends very much on the type of tree. Some trees don't have particularly definite bark, but if you want to do more definite bark, take your brush. Again, I'm just using this softening brush. Make sure there's not much paint on it, so dab it a little bit, and then just start on the dark side, and you can just bring that across to give some additional interest to the trunk. Now then, let's see. We've covered lifting out. We've covered the shadows. So you can see the light on the snow. You can also see where we had that warm tone from the first wash, how that helps to make the snow scene actually quite warm. The problem, if you do a snow scene and keep everything blue and cold, it's not terribly attractive to look at because the coldness makes you feel cold almost. Whereas if you get this warmth into it, that little bit of warmth doesn't take away from the fact that it's snow, but it just creates that nice warmth. And in the sky, of course, it's a simple thing to put a little bit of warmth in the sky, because the winter light, the evening light, the morning light, in fact any light almost in winter, is going to have that warmth to it. So you would often get the sky with that sort of gentle warmth in it. Right, I think we can probably just leave that as it is. I hope you enjoyed that little demonstration. Remember, that's from my book, the new book, Watercolour Snow Scenes, and that's part of the Take 3 Colours series. And it's available, as always, from all good booksellers and direct from Search Press. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. And keep painting, keep those brushes wet. Bye.